Haters Club podcast. I am your host, Claudia Campbell, and I am so thrilled to have you guys here. By the time you're listening to this podcast, I will be in Africa. So who knows, maybe I'll be on a safari right about now. I have no clue. But please pray for me if you have time. I would absolutely love that. I'm going to be sharing the gospel to a bunch of kids and just it'll be awesome. But yeah, I'll be in Africa right about now, which is crazy. But today I have a really exciting topic. It's something I get asked about so much. Like, it's probably in my top 10 questions I get asked about a lot. I will talk a lot of times about like purpose, about what God wants you to do, about the calling for your life, about like the Holy Spirit speaking to you, and I get this same question all the time. A lot of times my audience is mainly like teenagers, college age, young adults type of situation. And they'll be like, okay, but how do you know what your purpose is? How do you know what God's called you to do? Like, they'll look at me and they'll be like, you've obviously found your purpose. You've obviously found, like, what you're supposed to do, why you're supposed to do it. But how do I find my purpose? How do I find what God wants me to do? And there are just a lot of these questions that they have. And so today, I really am going to be talking about purpose. I'm going to be talking about how do you find what God has called you to do? How do you pursue, also for those of you who want to pursue ministry, a lot of people will ask me, how did you pursue ministry? How are you pursuing ministry? How do I go about that? Like, what path do I take for that? So I'm going to be answering a lot of those questions. I'm just going to be talking in general about how do we listen to the voice of God? How do we pursue the purpose God has put in our heart? So yeah, let's get into the episode. So as you can see, if you're watching the YouTube video, which by the way, this is available on video on YouTube. If you're listening through Spotify, it's also available video version on YouTube. I think Spotify also has a video version. So if you can see me, you can see that I have my Bible out right now, because whenever it comes to purpose, when it comes to what God is leading us to do, one of my very first times that I really started realizing that, like, God really started to show me this is how God prepares us for our purpose, was through this passage. I was actually at a camp. It was my summer after my 9th grade year, and like my youth pastor did this little class. He was talking about how God, like, it was Jeremiah 1. He was talking about how God prepared Jeremiah for his purpose. But not just in Jeremiah. You can see God do the same pattern with just about every, like, character in the Bible. And it's that there's a hidden time that we don't see, and then God calls them to do something. But here is the cool part in that hidden time. Typically what happens is in that hidden time, people don't know what they're going to do. People don't know what God's about to call them to do. But there's this hidden time. And I believe in that hidden time, God gives us experiences. He gives us almost like this resume of all of the things that he's done for us. And like we call that a testimony of what God has done in your life. And so I believe in that hidden time, like Jesus had 30 years of his ministry where we really aren't documented a lot of what he does. Except we know when he was about 12 years old, he went to the temple and he actually started teaching the priests things. That was an experience he had in him that prepared him for that whenever he was going to end up being famous, when he did have his public ministry. But it's not just Jesus that happens with. It also happens with a lot of others. So I just want to read this passage as we get started, talking about purpose. How do you know what God is calling you to do? Jeremiah 1. So I'm going to read in Jeremiah 1:4. This is when the Lord is calling Jeremiah to be a prophet. He says, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet among the nations." And I'm going to stop there and just talk about that verse for a little bit. Before you were even formed. The same thing is true for you that God is saying to Jeremiah. He knows you. He knows every single part about you. And from you being fully known, God then consecrated Jeremiah, and then he appointed. So I see like 3 major things happening. First, God knows him. Second, he consecrates him. And third of all, he appoints him. And consecrate just mean like he set him apart for like this holy purpose, designated him for this specific thing. And then the third thing is he appoints him. So appointing him is like, I am giving you the authority for this position. So the first thing is, he knows Jeremiah. God knows you inside and out. And I would challenge you in this time of maybe you not knowing, God knows you. Whether you like it or not, he knows you. But my question is, do you know God? Do you know God well enough that when God calls you to do something, you're able to have peace about a situation? Because I believe that God can know us, but there are times that God knows us and we don't fully know God. We don't fully know our relationship with God, right? And but he knows us before we were in the womb. And I think that that is extremely key whenever we talk about purpose, because the fact that God knows you, he knows every desire. He put those desires in you. And I think that what has to happen is you need to pay attention starting now. I don't care how young you are. You could be 13 listening to this podcast. You could be 21. What are the desires that God gave you since you were little? I know for me, one of my big things, I've always loved fashion. I've always loved speaking. I've always loved talking. I never wanted to be like a teacher, but I've always loved explaining things. I've always loved talking. I've always loved, again, like I said, fashion. There are different things in my life that I've loved, even like music, fitness. And I believe that God is going to use all of those things, all those desires. I'm a big emotional person. I'm very much feely. I believe that he uses that. I'm a visionary. I believe that he uses those desires and those talents he gives us from a young age because he wants to foster those things in our life. And so be careful whenever you're looking at your life. Please don't have the outlook on your life of, oh, he's not doing anything in my life because I can't see it. He's not doing anything in my life because I don't have the answer yet. Hold up. Because before Joseph got to serve at the palace, he was 30 years old before he got to do that. He was 17 when he was called, and he had this 13-year gap period where he knew what God had given him a vision for, and 13 years later, he had to wait those 13 years for God to actually give him a position that honored that vision. So if you're younger and God has given you a vision, you better hold on to that. And I'm preaching to myself about this. There are visions God has given me that are way bigger than I can possibly imagine, but for some of us, God is going to require us to wait and just trust for him to move in his timing. Because God's fulfillment of visions that he gives us, of like a feeling of, oh, I think that for some reason God's calling me into this ministry to do this, but I don't know how, and I don't know in what way. And I think sometimes when God gives us those like vision type of things, we need to take a step back and go, okay, God, you've given me, when God, and this is, I think, a key point, when God gives you a God big desire, you got to wait for a God big solution for that desire. Whenever you start to try to put your piece, your future together in control, it never really works out. And that's because you've been given a hole that is like made to only be filled by God's solution. And if you don't let God come in and fill that solution, your solution's never going to be enough. It's never going to make sense in your way. So yeah, it's going to feel like you're going to have to be really out of control for a while. It's not going to make sense for a while. But it's because God is teaching you dependence, and he's teaching you discipline to lean on him in those times when you don't know the solution. When it's the in-between, when, like for Joseph, those 13 years, he was at a prison, a literal prison, like a federal prison, before he ended up working at a palace, basically being like prince level. You should not be able to go from being someone who's seen as a criminal to someone who is seen as royalty. But that happened for Joseph in one single day. And so there might be times in your life, maybe you're in the in-between stage right now. You don't know why, but you feel like you're at an all-time low. A lot of the people who I see who are successful in life, even from a worldly standpoint, they're people who have gone through lows, and that low pushed them into their high, pushed them into what they were supposed to do. Sometimes, like it says, like you gotta hit rock bottom. So anyway, back to Jeremiah. He said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Then I consecrated you. Then I appointed you as prophet to the nations." When God gives you a calling on your life, he's also going to give you authority to that. When he called Moses to part the Red Sea, when he called Moses to lead a whole nation, Moses did not feel adequate. But God looks and he goes, hey, I've already evaluated all of your insecurities, all of your inadequacies to do this job, and yet I still chose you. So do you think that I just don't understand your inadequacies? Do you think that I doubt that you're going to be able to do this? Like, I understand that you doubt yourself sometimes, but you have to realize if God called you to it, then he's not asking you to do it on your own. He's saying, I'm aware of your shortcomings and I'm asking you to do it in spite of that. And would you allow me to work in that? And whenever I think of Moses' story, Moses was like, I'm not good at speaking. And he was like, can you please send me somebody else who's good at speaking? And God sends him Aaron. What happened there? Moses played into his insecurities, and I believe that while, yes, God was able to give him somebody to speak instead of Moses, I believe there was a blessing that Moses wasn't able to fully experience because he didn't allow God to enter into those inadequacies, because he wasn't the speaker. Yes, God worked in spite of him choosing to live in those insecurities, but I think there would have been such a bigger blessing that he would have been able to experience God to maybe a fuller way if he would have pressed into that and go, hey, I know that you called me to do this, and I know I don't feel prepared. I know I don't feel ready, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know that's what you called me to. So I just want you to remember that whenever God calls you somewhere, he also gives you the authority to walk into that room. If God calls you to walk into a room and you feel too young, you feel like you don't have the right authority to walk it. No, you better walk into that room like God is behind you, because he is. If God called you to go into a room, you better go into it with the confidence knowing that God has given you the authority to be in that room. And you don't need to be prideful, you don't need to be arrogant about it, but you definitely do not need to shortcut yourself because you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be in here. Everybody else is. Yeah, everybody else might be thinking, why are you in this room? But when they see God work through you, when they see God move through you, they're going to go, wow, I know why she's in that room. And it's not going to be because of you. It's going to be because you're allowing yourself to be used as a vessel to carry out God's mission, God's word. Now, verse 6, it says, Jeremiah says, alas, Lord God, I don't know how to speak. I'm a youth. But the Lord said to me, and this is all about insecurities, inadequacies, don't say I'm a youth, because everywhere I send you, you're going to go. All that I commanded you, you're going to speak. Don't be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord stretched out his hand, and he touched my mouth. And the Lord said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. And I love this because here's what happened. Before God touched Jeremiah's mouth, he called him. There will be things in your life God will call you to do, and it's not going to make sense. It's going to require you to step out in faith in a place that you're very insecure about, in a place where you don't know how God's going to move. And as you step out into your faith, it's so beautiful. As you step out into faith, that God is going to pick you up, that God is going to be behind you and work through you despite that insecurity. That's whenever he moves and he goes, I got you. And then he equips Jeremiah. He calls Jeremiah and then he equips him. And so I want you to remember that too. If you are called somewhere, you are being called, so say yes, have faith, and then remember God's equipped you. He either already has equipped you or he's going to equip you. And then he says, see, I have appointed you this day over the nations, over the kingdoms, to pluck up, to break down, to destroy, overthrow, to build, to plant. And I want you, and what I get from this passage is, for whatever reason, we know that Jeremiah is young. For that culture, for that day and age, Jeremiah is young. Pay attention. Like, before Jeremiah was called, there was moments in his life where he had no clue what God was going to call him to do. He had no clue. But here's what happened. From him being in the womb, God knew what he was going to do. And he gave Jeremiah specific talents and desires. And he told, he put that together. Do you recognize he made you for a specific purpose? those desires, those dreams you have, I think a lot of times realists who are very much like, oh, well, I could never do that because it's just not probable. I think sometimes they rob themselves of a possibility that faith could have given them. Because I think that there are times God gives us talents and desires because He wants to fulfill them, because He created us to be used by Him in that way. Some of y'all are great musicians, and you're like, well, but I'm never going to be able to do that because it's wild of me to think that I'm going to make it one day making worship music. It's wild of me thinking I'm going to make it one day making regular music and being a light to other celebrities out there. And God's going, but that's what I made you for. Yeah, I know it's wild, but I'm kind of a wild God who has kind of wild powers. Like, nothing is impossible with God. And so if He has put a desire in your heart, even if it's what's considered to the world to be small, and this is what I love about the Bible, there are times God calls people in the Bible, the Samaritan woman, He did not call her to be some famous chick in front of 1,000 people. He called her to simply go and tell the people around her about God. Some of you guys are not called to be on stages, to be this crazy big, and we're told in the world that that's what we're called to do. Some of you guys are simply called to be a light in your community, to talk about Jesus where you are. Some of you guys are called to be good and godly moms, good and godly dads, called to be good and godly spouses. Some of you guys are called to be lights in your family. And you don't know the effect that that could have. You could be an Andrew. Andrew was Peter, the disciple's brother. And Jesus called Andrew, and Andrew then went to Peter, and he told Peter. But if Andrew hadn't have gone to Peter, Peter wouldn't have written the books in the New Testament that he wrote. Peter wouldn't have been one of Jesus's main guys. But because Andrew was faithful to do a small thing that seemed like it was small, he just impacted his family. He just told his brother about Jesus. And his brother ended up being one of the big people. But some of you guys, and that's what I have to remind you guys too about. God talks about how the church, we're a body of believers. We have different functions. Some of you guys don't want to be in the spotlight, and that is a good and healthy and okay thing. You're not any less than just because you don't want to be in the spotlight. You actually get to serve a beautiful role as somebody who gets to be behind the scenes, as somebody who gets to be a helper. You get to serve a lot of roles that somebody who, sorry, I had to move my microphone, as somebody who maybe doesn't work behind the scenes, like your spot in working there is just as beneficial as my spot in front of a camera. I don't know how I got here. I just know that I continue to take the right step. And this is the spot, if you want practical advice, how do I find my purpose? You follow the word and you follow what Jesus is calling you to do in your everyday life. You wake up and you say, okay, God, what do you want me to do today? If you're in school, I will tell you right now, I did not get to be, by the way, a lot of people will look at Christian influencers like me and go, oh, they found it. They understand everything they're supposed to do. Their life has it made. Their life makes sense. No, my life doesn't make sense. In fact, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm still trying to find my purpose. I think this is a big part of my purpose, but I'm still pursuing God and asking God, what do you want me to do with this? What do you want me to do moving forward in my life? And so you might look at people who have a big following, who are on stages and go, oh, God is using them so well. Yeah, He is. But guess what? He could use you with the same value and the same level if you just went to school and you were a light in your school. If you just prayed over that person He called you to pray over. If you went into the grocery store and you just said, hey, Jesus loves you, to your cashier as you left. If you do the little things, maybe God's calling you to start a Bible study. Start a Bible study. And if you do that and you do that well, and that's what God is calling you to do in this season of your life, you are being just as valuable. And that's something that people don't understand. People think like, oh my goodness, I'm not being successful, because they're trying, and especially when it comes to ministry, people are trying to do ministry with the world's level, with the world's ideals of success. Okay, I'm going to do ministry, but I'm going to only think about it in terms of the world's success. That's not if you're doing the work of God, then you have to evaluate it the way God would evaluate it. And when God looks at ministry, he goes, hey, ministry is ministry, whether you're doing it on a one-on-one discipleship, whether you're doing it as a little Bible study, or whether you're doing it on this massive, big mega church stage. Ministry is ministry. The question is, are you following what God is calling you to do? Are you following his word? Are you taking the little steps to follow him? And I believe he will reveal your purpose. Sometimes, and I'm going to talk about just regular jobs and purpose and stuff like that, and then I'm going to shift over to ministry. I will say this. Do not think, oh, I'm just going to sit around and do nothing all day and it's going to find me. And whenever I say purpose, I mean what you're supposed to do on this life. There's a fulfillment that comes from whenever you go, man, that's why I was put here on this earth, to do that job for the kingdom. And not all of it has to be ministry. Some of you guys have to be doctors, you need to be lawyers, you need to be marine biologists, and you need to be lights in those fields because we need that. So badly we need that. I remember whenever I used to want to be a fashion designer, people would be like, that is such a secular field. Why in the world would you want to be a fashion designer? And I would look at them and I go, so don't we need more Christians in that field because it's a secular environment? They'd be like, whoa. One of my friends, I know him, he's an influencer, he's a Christian influencer, and he does modeling. And there were a bunch of people in his comment section, they were like, I cannot believe that you're being so vain as to model. That is such a secular field. And I commented on his video, and I was like, dude, I'm proud of what you're doing. Because honestly, you're doing it in a good, fine, modest way. And there needs to be Christians in those fields. We need to have Christians in fields that are dark. Why? Yes, I'm not telling you to go sign up for a strip club or something. I don't think you don't need to be in a job that is going to cause you to be sinful. No, don't do that. But stuff like fashion, stuff like even some science fields, there are a lot of fields that there aren't a lot of Christians in, and we need Christians in there. So you will have people, we're the No Haters Club podcast, you'll have people who will hate on whatever you do. But you have to realize, okay, if this is something God's called me into, I'm going to walk into it with confidence, knowing that God's called me in here, and I'm living for God, not the opinions of these people. But, like I said, you can't just, sit around and just twiddle your thumbs and be like, oh, well, the job's going to come to me. No. It is okay to be active in the waiting. And this is something that a lot of people get scared of, is they're like, what if I mess up what God has planned for me? Oh, no. You're not going to mess up what God has planned for you if you're living righteously and following him. Okay? Let me just put that out there. Now, if you're living on your own and you're claiming God's name and you're like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want and then be like, God, you got me, right? There are consequences for sin that you choose. There are consequences for living your own way. But if you're actively following God's voice, you're living a righteous life, you're continually going, okay, God, what about this? What about this? And maybe you come to a decision what college do I go to? And my dad taught me this from a young age. I love the fact he taught me this. Is he was like, a lot of times people will be like, oh my goodness, I just don't know what college does God want me to go to. And sometimes God will be very clear with your life and he will be like, go to this college. Point blank, go there. If you don't go there, I am calling you to go there. And you know. And you need to go there. But then there are other times where it's this middle, this in between. And it's God isn't saying go here or here. He's saying both are good options and I will bless what you choose. So you also have to realize too, if God isn't giving you a word of going here, maybe he's saying you can choose. And whatever option you have, you're not going to mess up my plan. I'm going to bless you. You have freedom to choose. And if that's the case, be happy that you have freedom to choose and he's going to bless your decision. And yeah, it's hard because now you're responsible for that decision. But be excited. Be happy. Because, if God allows you to choose, then, choose and enjoy it. Enjoy the fact that you get to choose. Not everything in life, I don't know how to describe it, but I truly do believe, there are some things that God just is yeah, you can choose. I think there are moments in life that he makes happen. But just like I got to choose what outfit I wore today, I don't think that all the time it's hey, Claudia, you have to wear this blue shirt, and if you don't wear that blue shirt, then you're making the wrong choice and messing up your purpose. I think it's more there are some decisions out there where God's yeah, you can choose what outfit you wear. Okay, sounds good. You know what I'm saying? you're not going to mess up the plans God has for you because you're just not strong enough to do that. God is so much stronger than you are. And if you think, oh my goodness, I'm living righteous and I'm just afraid I'm going to mess up God's plan, no. That's the enemy trying to put doubt and shame and fear into your mind. That's actually not the case at all. Like, you are not strong enough to mess up God's plan for your life if you're living righteously, actively. So take that fear, take that thought, hold it captive, and get it out of your mind, because that is just like, it's just not true, y'all. And so I would say, I think Bob Goff said this at one point. He was like, sometimes you just got to try some things. And I totally agree with him. So before I was doing the social media stuff, before I even knew that I had a gift in speaking, that I loved speaking about God, I knew I loved fashion. And I was like, I love fashion. And I knew that I loved words. There was a time I started my own fashion business. And I started it, and I needed to just try it. I needed to just start it. Why? Because I needed to see that that's not what I wanted to do. I started sewing and making clothes, and I still do make clothes. But what did I learn? I learned that I did not want to sew clothes for a living, because it was a lot of time. It was a lot of effort, and I barely got paid anything at all. And God just showed me, like, yeah, he allowed that business endeavor in middle school to fail. It just didn't work out. But I needed to try that, right? And I think that there are some things that you just need to try. I think that it is not a bad idea. If you're like, I don't know at all what I want to do in my life, just start trying things. Just start trying. Like, go down this path until you run into a wall. And once you run into the wall, go down another path. Eventually, you'll probably end up finding a path you really enjoy. Like that. Or I've had this happen too. I'll go down one path and it'll be a closed door, but it shows me another path that I really like. Like, I went down this path assuming that it'll end a certain way, but it doesn't. It actually ends in directing me into a different way that I'm like, oh, I like this better. Like, that makes so much more sense now. So continually try things, and you'll probably end up finding what you like. Before I was speaking, I learned that I really liked writing because I wrote a manuscript of a book that I actually haven't published. But I found I loved writing and that I wanted to be an author one day. And I think that that's something that I'm going to be one day, because I write now. I'm like, oh my goodness, I actually have a gift in writing. I love writing. While I didn't publish that manuscript, I discovered that I had a talent and a gift to write and that I enjoyed writing. But I think doing that led me, all of those little events that I tried and that didn't work out and that failed, it taught me more about myself, taught me how driven I was. It taught me that I enjoyed being my own boss, to the point where now that I'm here today, yeah, I still don't have things figured out, but they're a lot more figured out than they were 2 years ago before I had started, or like 4 years ago, before I started any of those things. You see what I'm saying? So just continually try things, and when they fail, don't be mad about it. I coined this phrase recently. I said, I'm not committed to perfection. I am committed to learning something about the situation. And it helps me. I'll go into a situation in life and I'll be like, I'm not committed to doing everything perfect here, but I am committed to learning a lesson here and to bettering myself through this in some way. And it, low-key, it definitely helps 100%. But now I also want to talk about ministry. A lot of people who are like, how do I pursue ministry? Or what is ministry? Okay, so ministry is so simple. You can do ministry and it not be your job. In fact, everybody should be doing ministry and it not be their job. But then there are some people who want to pursue ministry as their job. So Claudia, how do we do this? A lot of people ask me this because they're like, oh my goodness, you're in such a place in ministry. How do you do this? And it's crazy because, y'all, I don't even feel like I am. I feel like I'm like, I forget sometimes that my words impact people. Just on a real note, because I just, forget, I don't know how to describe it. It just, I think God has humbled me so many times to the point where I'm just like, y'all, I'm really not all that in a bag of chips. I don't know why you're asking me, but okay, I guess I'll answer. But anyway, no, really, that's genuinely how it is sometimes. But if you want to pursue ministry, and ministry is honestly just doing the work of the gospel. It's worshiping Jesus, it's glorifying God. It's carrying out the Great Commission. It's sharing the gospel to people, but it's not just sharing the gospel to people. It's literally living like Jesus would. That's how I would describe it. It's helping people who are in need. It's treating people the way Jesus would. It's loving people. If you want to pursue ministry, and I go back to this, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be whatever it is you want to be, whatever that end goal is, you have to change your day to day to reflect that. Whoever you look at yourself in 10 years and you go, I want to be her or I want to be him in those 10 years, your everyday life has to start changing, right? Like if I wanted to be an Olympic athlete in 10 years, I wouldn't just wait around and think that I'd wake up one day and turn into one. No, I'd start hitting the gym. I'd start going to the gym. I'd start preparing. I'd start training every single day. If you want to be in ministry, here's what you need to do. And it's so simple. You need to start doing ministry in your day-to-day life. Maybe it's starting a Bible study. Maybe it's discipling somebody. Maybe it's getting discipled. You need to start doing whatever it is in your day-to-day life. And then God's going to elevate you. He's going to direct you. But I think sometimes God needs to see, okay, are you willing to be faithful in the quiet moments? Are you willing to be faithful when you're not getting a lot of glory? And then if he wants to elevate you, he will. This ministry did not start with me just simply posting my first video and it blowing up. That is literally not what happened at all. There were a lot of hidden years that nobody saw, where I would talk with my friends, where I would give my friends really good advice, where I would learn things, where I would read books, I would listen to advice, I would listen to podcasts. Why? Because I was getting the fuel I needed for me. I was learning me, and then I would also pour out to other people. And then whenever I started social media, it took me probably like a year before God ever elevated me, ever blew me up, because he had to teach me, okay, Claudia, A, he had to like show me specifically what I was supposed to do, but B, he had to show me discipline in that time when nobody was watching. He had to prepare me. He had to prepare me for the hate comments. But there was like, again, I go back to, he will prepare you before he elevates you. There was a 30 years of silence in Jesus' ministry, and then he elevates Jesus to be like the most famous person ever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, anyway, you know what I'm saying. You understand what I'm saying. There will be those moments of preparation, but if you want to start doing ministry now, if you want to start doing ministry in the future, you have to start doing it now. You have to change your day-to-day life. Just like if you want to be buff one day, you're going to have to start hitting the gym. Whatever end behavior you want to have, you have to start changing your everyday life to reflect that. And if that's the case, if you feel like you have a speaking gift, I don't know, talk to your church. See if you can lead like a girls group. See if you can lead a Bible study or a Sunday school class. If you do really well with organizing events and you want to somehow organize events to the glory of God, see if you can organize some sort of event. See if you can organize a Bible. Like, you can be so creative, but start doing ministry now. And I am not joking when I say to you, there is nothing too small that God can't elevate. Start with the smallest thing ever. I dare you. Start with the smallest thing ever and go, okay, God, this is the smallest thing ever. Maybe I feel like it's the smallest thing. I'm discipling somebody right now. We're just meeting one-on-one for coffee. You'll be surprised, because that maybe meeting one-on-one for coffee might turn into a conference where you're speaking to 50 girls. You have no clue what God can do. Like, genuinely, you have no clue how he can elevate you. I've seen it in my own life. Again, I started with just like a few people. I started just giving my friends advice. I started then just making little videos on TikTok that got no views. And now what am I doing? I'm going to Africa to talk to people, to young people, about identity in Christ. And to talk to them about the gospel, but specifically about how do they find their identity in Christ. Like, I didn't open that door. There's no way I could have opened that door. There are countless of other people I know, and they're in their spot. And anytime you ask somebody who has a platform or who is just doing a ministry spot and you want to be in that ministry spot, you say, how did you get here? They were like, I don't know, man. It's a really wacky story that's just specific to me. And they'll tell you, and you'll go, well, I can't recreate that. Yeah, because you're not supposed to create that. You're supposed to do what God's called you to do, be original in who God's called you to, and then he will put you in a original position. Do not doubt him. Continue to have faith. Continue to seek him. Continue to ask of him in the day-to-day, God, what do you want me to do? And it's going to feel small right now, but the kingdom impact isn't going to be small. The kingdom impact is going to be big. But I truly do believe that sometimes whenever we start out small and we are faithful in the small, then that's when God goes, okay, you're faithful with the small. Here's maybe something a little bit bigger. And that isn't all the time audience size. That isn't all the time elevation. Sometimes a bit bigger is more responsibility. It's something that's like deeper. Like, again, like I said, you may not be called to speak on a stage in front of thousands of people, to lead worship in front of thousands of people. Maybe you are. And if you are, then do not let other people like try to talk you out of that if you really truly believe that. But also don't let it go to your head. Just continually follow Christ. But some of you guys, a lot of us are not made for that. A lot of us are made, okay, I'm going to be like a really good person in my family. I'm going to be a really good friend. I'm going to have an impact on people. And you have no clue what you just doing your impact on those people can have on the lives of other people. Okay? Okay. But no matter what God has you to do, He's the one that's going to direct you. He's the one that made you. So listen to those desires in your heart. Listen to what God is doing in you now. And if it feels like it's silence, then just be like, okay, He's building my resume. He is putting in my, like, he's building me up so that now I have reminders of how faithful He is. So that later down the road, I'm going to look back on these experiences and you'll see God winks from time to time where you're like, that moment seemed like it's going to be really important in my whole story, but I don't know how it's important yet. But I know it will be. And you'll have those feelings where you're like, I know that's important, but I just don't have the connecting piece yet. And like, remember those moments, because there will come a moment when all of it will be put together. All of it will make sense. And when that happens, it's crazy to see how God works. And God hasn't done all of that for me yet. I've just seen more and more God winks as I'm getting feel like I'm getting closer to the time of Him tying it all together. But whenever I see it happen in other people's lives, it's like the coolest thing in the world. So just continually pray and surround yourself with community who can go with you, who can believe with you in those like places of what you're supposed to be doing. Don't surround yourself with community who's going to try to talk you out of it because they're intimidated or they're jealous, or in some way they're like, yeah, but that's not a cool thing to do. Like, why do you think God's calling you to do that? Surround yourself with community who's going to be like, yes, you got to do what God's called you to do. I'm proud of you for this. So anyway, those are my tips. That's how I know. That's how it's easiest for me to describe purpose. And just remind yourself, take a chill pill. You don't have to know everything right now. God will reveal it to you. Just keep walking with Him, and you're not going to mess it up. Okay? You guys got this. I fully believe in you. And I would absolutely love it. I just want to remind you guys before I go. DM me if you have questions. I would absolutely love your questions. I would love to maybe have a Q&A podcast where we talk about these questions. Please, please, please talk with me, DM me. I would love to know what God's doing in your life. Also, please leave a review if you can on Spotify. That would help the podcast so much. Share it. It would honestly help this podcast so much. I love doing this. I want to continue to do this. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, because again, that would help the most. I hope you guys have an amazing Tuesday, and I cannot wait to hear how God works out you guys' purpose. I really can. I love you guys so much. See you next. Bye. So catch me if I fall.